Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. We are back with another look at 20th century boys. We've been doing this retrospective for the last year or half year or so, not a full year. The goal is to do it in the over the course of this year. And I am about to cover the second half of volume 6 of the Perfect Collection. And at this point, I want to say something I think I said at the beginning, but just a reminder, or if you're joining part way, there are going to be major spoilers as we talk about this section. If you saw my last video, you know we are about to reveal the identity of our friend, who has been a mystery up until this point. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some other things in this half of the volume before we talk about that. So I will give a very clear and distinct spoiler warning before we get to that part. If you haven't read up to this point, or if you haven't read anything at all and you don't want the identity of the antagonist spoiled, I'm only really going to talk about it in this video directly. If I have to bring it up again in other videos, I will try and dance around the subject. But I have to talk about who our friend is in order to really review all of the storytelling techniques that Urasawa uses. So, if you don't want spoilers, if you don't want to know that yet, I would encourage you to stop when I give the very clear indication that I'm about to talk about Friend's identity, and then come back whenever you have read that. But for the most part, this is not really a review. It is my advice. My review summary is read the series. It's great. It's very good stuff. My goal here is more to talk about why the writing works and why it's meant so much to me. So, and in this in covering the second half of this volume, we have to dig some into Friend's identity to do that. And this is actually going to be, I think, a shorter video because a lot of what happens here is just tying together threads that we've had for a while. I'm going to gloss over a lot of it because it's very competent, it's well written, it's very suspenseful as you go through it. But to summarize it is very quick. But there is one thread we have to cover, something that's very important that doesn't have anything to do with our friend's identity. And while this is something of a spoiler, I think most people have seen it coming if you've been following this series. So, in chapter 13 of this volume, we finally come face to face with Haro Namio again. And this is the guy who sings the Hello, Hello Expo song. He is an enka singer. Is sometimes conflated with country music. That's not really the best comparison. He might be more like a person who performs Gregorian chants. Enka is a very traditional form of Japanese singing, and he's been hired to perform the Hello Hello Expo song by our friend. Now, if you've been following the series up to this point, or at least watching the videos, you know, of course, that the Expo of 1970 is a very important thing to our friend. It's part of what he draws his identity from, although we're not really clear why that is yet, but it's something he resonated with a great deal. And he has arranged for another World Expo to take place in Japan in the year 2015. He has revived the theme song from the 1970 Expo, and he's using it as the theme song for the 2015 Expo. This all emphasizes how Friend is stuck in the past, and he is trying to keep the things that he dreamt up in childhood a part of his life. And Haro Namio is a part of that because he performs the theme song. And we have been seeing him, I believe, since the middle of chapter 4. He's been kind of cropping up on radio, on TV stations, all over the place. And we're just like, what is with this guy? Well, Urasawa did not do that by accident. He is about to come in the story in a major way. We're not going to learn everything there is to know about Namio in this part of the story, but we are about to learn some very important things about him. And I think this is just another sign of really great storytelling on Urasawa's part. If you were to read this in the original magazines it was published in, you would have seen Haro Namio appear 4 years, maybe as much as 4 years before you got any major development for him. He was basically just a background character. He was white noise almost by the time Urasawa actually develops him. That's quite clever because that means the audience looks at him almost the way the characters themselves do. He's just a part of the FDP. He reinforces the public narrative, and who cares? He's just another sucker that Friend has brought under his wing to help him run his political movement. And we see this attitude mirrored even at the beginning of this chapter. It is New Year's Eve, so it is 2014, 14 years after the major confrontation between the FDP and Kenji's group. And we see some of the survivors. We have Yoshitsune, of course. We have Yukiji. We have Kana. And some of their friends. Actually, I don't think... No, Kana isn't here. I believe she is still at the hospital researching... No, we'll get to that later. She was at the hospital researching her mother's past, and she's come back to Tokyo, but she hasn't reunited with Yoshitsune's group yet. And of course, we have Koizumi there as well. So what we are about to see is a memorial, because our characters are not looking back or not looking forward to the expo. They are looking back on Bloody New Year's Eve. We see the memorial photographs of Kenji and Maro here, and there is some discussion of what they plan to do, which is trace Dr. Yamane, which is actually what we have seen Acho doing as well. These threads will pay off later, but right now, something more important is going to happen. We have, a little more commiseration. Yoshitsune gives something like an inspiring speech because Yoshitsune has become the leader. He is, for all practical intents and purposes, the person with the most power out of Kenji's old group because he has built this underground network. He can summon a helicopter and stage a helicopter rescue. He's actually quite impressive, as we've learned by this point. But that's not what's really important. It's the leading back to these memorial pictures that we see on a couple of pages, and they're even pretty much in the same panel, which is, I'm sure, deliberate, so that we see them in the same place and they are constantly being, called out in our mind. Again, Urasawa does this thing where he breaks the panel out all the way to the full bleed. That tells us that's a pretty important image, and we should keep a hold of it. We also see Kana, of course, passing a TV display that is playing Namio's song. She has a flashback as she talks with a street busker, and she has a flashback to her uncle Kenji being a street busker, and we see the homeless people. They're celebrating with Kami-sama, and all of this is leading to the revelation that the year 2015 is going to be a wild one. Here again we see giant robot. It's not clear if this is a flashback or if this is another vision of the future with which Kami-sama and Kana have every so often. But after that, we come to Haru Namio himself, and we see him leaving a performance, probably the performance we just saw on TV, with his manager. He's wearing this nice coat. He's wealthy, he's influential, he has people bowing and scraping to him and congratulating him and all these other things. And we're like, man, who is this jerk? What is important about him? And we start to see he's not just a face on TV, because his manager says, there's a big party afterward. Do you want to go? And Namio just says, no, let's just go straight home. Then he says, how was the performance tonight? And Maro says, oh, it was superb. The staging was brilliant. Then Namio says, I certainly hope at least a few people out there got the subliminal warnings we embedded in the background visuals. That's very interesting. Why would he be putting subliminal messages in the background? Is that what triggered Kami-sama and Kana's visions? Well, towards what end would he do this? Why does he say 2015 is finally here and it's going to be a busy year? Well, it's because his manager is Maro. Haru Namio is a sleeper agent. Been sleeping under our noses and the noses of the FDP for 4 years of story. Honestly, not quite that long narrative itself, at least as far as we know. But he has been there. He has been an agent for change for a very long time. That is a great reveal. And of course, it tells us that Morrow is alive, and he still has a hand to play, and he is being incredibly subtle about it. Morrow was probably the bluntest spoken, obviously the biggest, and the least subtle character out of Kenji's group. And now we see him functioning almost as a Machiavellian presence story. Whereas Yoshitsune has become a conventional leader, Morrow is a master spy, and it's incredible. It's really fascinating the things he has done and the things he has had to put up with as he worked his way into this position. And we don't actually get to see a whole lot of that, but there is a hint. We have this flashback sequence to, of course, boys when they're young, and they're discussing the only good thing about New Year's, because on New Year's everything is closed, you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything. The only good thing that happens on New Year's is you're given otoshidama, the red envelopes that contain lucky money. It's supposed to bring you good fortune over the course of the year. And traditionally, if your family's in mourning, if they've lost a relative, and you are offered a toshidama, you're supposed to refuse it. And we actually see this discussed between our heroes in this flashback sequence. And then we go forward to see Morrow doing his job as Haru's manager, and we get a shot of Namio just handing out a toshidama, these big bulging envelopes. I mean, he's a wealthy man, he's a famous man, he has a lot of people whose careers he has helped out over the years, and they like him, they're grateful to him, and he's giving them these gifts because as the leader of not exactly a family, but definitely a group of very closely knit professionals, that is the thing that is socially expected of him. And they're stuffed full of money because, hey, he's Haru Namio, he can afford to do that. And then we see him offer one to Morrow, and Morrow turns it away. And he says, I've been in mourning since the beginning of 2001. And that is really all you need to know about how Morrow has lived his life. Don't get a whole lot beyond that. By taking this simple tradition and using it to illustrate what Morrow has gone through, I think Urasawa does something incredibly powerful and subtle in his characterization. And it's necessary to know that we're about to see something very dark. Morrow and Namio go to Friend on New Year's Day. And Namio has been asked to personally perform the Hello Hello Expo song for our friend. And he's willing to do that because he is a consummate sleeper agent, but it grates on him. We don't know why Namio dislikes our friend so much, but clearly he does because he has been working with Morrow all this time. Been undercutting our friend. He's been very dedicated to this purpose. And when Morrow gets there, he confides in Namio that he is wearing a suicide vest. He has rigged himself with explosives. He sees an opportunity to kill our friend. He is going to take it. This is something that is a very profound ethical dilemma that Urasawa presents us with. Morrow knows that our friend is a monster, and he is going to continue to do evil things as long as he remains in control of Japan. And he and Namio have agreed that it's important that this be ended. Namio is going to sketch his portrait after the personal performance because our friend will not be wearing his mask. Namio did not know Kenji or any of his friends when they were young, so he can't really identify friend to Morrow. But he has mastered portraiture to a certain extent, and he's going to try and duplicate the sketch, but he tells Morrow, if you see an opportunity to kill our friend, just take it. It doesn't matter if I die too. That is a very powerful moment because it testifies to Namio's resolve and his commitment to the cause. But it's also a sign that he is just as he's in just as dark a place as Morrow is, even though he doesn't show it on his face, and that's very interesting as well. And we have the meeting between our friend and Namio, the performance, and this whole time we see Morrow there trying to decide if he should blow himself up. This is a very tense scene. It contrasts the performance of this very silly, banal Hello Expo song with Morrow sitting here trembling with grief, with rage, with a mixture of all kinds of emotions, and gripping this the ripcord on a suicide vest. And ultimately, something very simple and human happens. He sees a man, a high-ranking officer actually in the FDP, talking to an aide, and the man hears that he has a grandchild has been born. His daughter has had a child, and this official it's a very human moment when he hears that both his daughter and his grandchild are healthy, and Morrow realizes he can't kill them just to get our friend. And it's a very cliche thing, but he knows that if he does that, he will be just as great a monster. So ultimately, he doesn't. And this is a profound moral moment in the entire story. Yoshitsune and Acho have done some pretty harsh things to get where they need to go, but Morrow was prepared to go farther than either of them, I think. But he also maintains a moral core that does not allow him to do this. And this reintroduction of his character is fantastic. We haven't seen him for several volumes. Now that he's back, we see where he is emotionally. We see where his convictions lie. We see where his morals stand. He has not changed from the man we knew when he was younger, but he's much more serious. He's much more focused, much more aware of the consequences if he does not succeed in what he set out to do. And from this point forward, the rest of the volume is a slow unpacking of all the clues. Morrow, of course, sees the caricature that Harunamio draws. Kana has returned and is following the pieces of the breadcrumbs that her mother has left for her. Acho and his companion are following Dr. Yamane, and they all meet up again at the school, at the science lab, where Donkey jumped out the window one night. Morrow meets Kana out in the courtyard. He doesn't recognize her because they've been separated so long. And they actually don't go into the school proper. It's only Acho and company that go there with a doctor they kidnap from a pharmaceutical company in our last video. And there they meet Dr. Yamane. Dr. Yamane has been waiting, not for them, although he suspected they would come. He's been waiting for our friend. And I'm not going to set up all the pieces for you. Urasawa does a great job of that, and I think you can just read it if you really want to see the facts laid out piece by piece. The really important thing, there are two. One is the pictures. In the history book, there was always a picture of Kenji and his friends staring down the robot, taken from behind them, taken by someone they knew, taken by someone who was there. And if you pay attention to the silhouettes, you realize that not everybody who went to confront the machine in that photograph, that should have been your first clue. How did they get that photograph to put it in the history books? But if you were reading and you were more focused on the human drama between Kiyomi and Kana, you may very well have missed that. I did my first reading. Second clue, people in the apartment. The people in the apartment that they went to while they were scoping out the area around the FDP. Because they went to a specific apartment, and there were kids there, and Kenji made them fried rice, but they never seemed to recognize either Kenji or Fukube, even though Fukube said it was his apartment. That was because Fukube had arranged for the actual parents of the kids to be gone. He did that because he was the leader of the FDP. Now, this reveal is not a brilliant reveal, breathtaking reveal. In fact, we see all the pieces set up for us again in the narrative, in these last few chapters of the volume. And nobody ever says, oh, Fukube is our friend. Because by this point, it's almost immaterial. Everything about our friend is a lie. It doesn't matter, it turns out, if you actually figure out who he is anymore. All of his hopes and dreams were so childish that you almost can't believe that he's a real human being. He shows up wearing this silly mask. I'll see if I can find a picture of it, but of course we have seen it before. Some of the flashbacks. And here it is. Yeah, this monkey mask he shows up wearing. And he spars with Yamane, and we come to realize that our friend has never really had his feet on the ground. I think it's very interesting that the first time we see him, he is levitating, because he's never really been grounded in reality at all. And that has been a big problem for everyone in the FDP, because they can't seem to control him. They can't seem to control his impulses. He keeps having these wild, silly ideas, like redoing the expo. And they're fed up. Yamane shoots him. Very interesting, the way this plays out. That the very first time we see our friend's face after we know his name, dead. Now, this could be a really terrible twist. But actually, I think the only option that Urasawa had at this point. The reveal of our friend's identity, the reveal that he is Fukube, it comes at an interesting time. It's the end of Volume 6. That's almost exactly halfway through the series. The halfway point is an odd place to make this kind of reveal. You would expect it to happen at the end of the second act. To create a low point. But Urasawa has his own low point in mind here. What is actually happening here is the reveal that our friend is something larger than life. Can't really talk about that in this volume, so I just want to talk about why this reveal and this twist is what had to happen. And the short answer is because everything else you could do with our friend had already happened. He had been a mystery. Nobody knew who he was, or even if he was real. And then Kenji had a direct confrontation with him. And then he became a more immediate threat because he was trying to take Kana back from Kenji. We found out that he was Kana's father, and that gave him a very clear relationship to Kenji. That progressed his character in that way. And then, although there was a lot of development for our heroes, he didn't really come back into the story until Bloody New Year's Eve. Bloody New Year's Eve was the first major attempt to stop him, and of course it failed. After that, once again, our friend kind of drops out of the narrative, but several things are still done with him. We're given a red herring, we're given Sadakio, and we have some time to think about whether he could be our friend. And then we go back and we see some of his history in the VR machine. And we learn a little bit more about what motivates him. We see his new grand plan, the rebuilding of the expo, and we begin to understand the tricks and techniques that he uses and what motivates him. He's obsessed with the past. He lies constantly. He uses his charisma and his ability to manage much more competent subordinates to keep his programs running after he becomes the most important figure in Japanese politics. In fact, there's a very real sense in which our friend is a divine emperor after the mold of the old emperors of Japan. He does not actually involve himself in the running of the country. He has people who do that for him. Manjome, the Dream Navigators. These are the people who do the dirty work of actually running the country, which is beneath divine presence, which is our friend. He never looks directly at people, almost. There is always something between him and others. And these are all signs that are building towards this moment. The reveal that our friend, his physical vessel, may not actually matter, as he is, in many ways, divine, in the minds of his followers at least, if not in reality. And so the reveal of who he is pretty much has to happen at this point. You can't do anything else with him without wasting time, without ruining the pacing of the story and the sense of suspense that keeps you moving forward. And even now, at the moment when our friend shot before our eyes when he's dead, we realize we'll live again. He cannot be stopped by death. That is a brilliant twist. But we don't actually get that revelation here. We only see him die. And seeing him die, the almost anticlimax of having another villain shoot him down in the school is interesting because it plays into the theme of the story. The future is not what you expect. And it also shows the mundanity of Fukube himself. He was not any different from Kenji or any of the other people in the factions. In spite of all of the supernatural powers he supposedly has, he is just man like them. He can be shot and killed like them. It is his effect on the minds of others that lends him his almost supernatural powers. But we'll get to that later. For now, we have a sudden, unexpected ending volume right after the reintroduction of a character I had been waiting to see for quite some time. This is a very interesting middle point. We're not done with the second act yet. We're beginning to see what the end has to be. At this point, only possible end to the second act be the revelation of our friend in all his divinity. Something to look forward to, Volume 7. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit. And I'll talk to you later.